I gazed out the window, lost in thought, as I reflected on the dynamics of my family. It hadn't been easy, growing up as the eldest daughter in a household where expectations always seemed to weigh heavier on my shoulders. Financial discussions were always tense, and my mother's words lingered in my mind. Have you taken out the money you received as payment? A straightforward question, perhaps, but layered with years of unspoken grievances. I knew she was referring to the financial contributions I'd made to the family over the past 3 years. She often reminded me of the sacrifices she and my father made to support my education, but I couldn't help but feel a subtle undercurrent of resentment when she mentioned I'd never thanked her for it. As she spoke, her tone sharpened, and the conversation turned more confrontational than usual. If you're earning a full-time income and living under this roof, it's only fair that you contribute financially, she said. Her words struck a nerve. I took a deep breath and replied, I understand, Mom, but why this sudden tone? Is something bothering you? You've never fussed about gratitude before. The discussion spiraled into a debate about fairness, duty, and expectations. My mother framed my financial contributions as a repayment for past support, something I couldn't agree with. As the eldest daughter, I've been contributing without question, but I feel like I've been carrying more than my share, I said. Yet, her response cut deeply. If you're unwilling to contribute, perhaps it's time for you to move out. Someone with your limited experience will struggle to live independently. That was the breaking point. For 3 years, I had silently handed over a portion of my earnings, thinking it was my duty. But now, I realized that my efforts were being taken for granted. Thank you for everything, I said firmly, but I will be leaving. The weight of the decision was heavy, but I knew it was time to prioritize myself. The memories of my childhood flooded back as I prepared to move out. I was 7 when my younger sister, Ellie, was born. My parents were ecstatic, and I was expected to be the doting older sibling. She's adorable, my mother would say. You'll protect her, won't you, Sophia? I nodded, wanting to meet their expectations, but the reality of being the elder child soon became apparent. My needs seemed secondary, my concerns often dismissed. I remember one instance vividly. I had misplaced my gym bag and asked my mother if she'd seen it. Without much concern, she replied, Isn't it hanging up? You should look after your things. After a frantic search, I found it shoved into a drawer, mixed with other items. When my mother saw the mess, she scolded me. Why can't you be more careful? Ellie requires more attention than you. I stood there, confused and hurt, but I blamed myself. I thought that maybe, if I were better, my parents would treat me the same as Ellie. The disparity in how we were treated only grew as the years passed. Ellie's requests were met with enthusiasm, while mine were brushed aside. I remember asking my father for a toy after seeing him buy one for Ellie. I'll get you one next time, he said, though next time never came. When I persisted, his frustration boiled over, and I was met with sharp words that left me feeling invisible. Even as I helped around the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of being overlooked. Stop being jealous of Ellie, my mother would say whenever I voiced my feelings. You're the older sibling, you should know better. She'd hand me a sponge, directing me to the sink while she and Ellie laughed in the background. I did chores mechanically, the weight of unspoken expectations pressing down on me. As I grew older, the dynamic didn't change. When I expressed my desire to live on my own for college, my parents were adamantly against it. Living alone is dangerous, they said, though I suspected their resistance had more to do with losing the support I provided at home. Reluctantly, I stayed. I convinced myself they simply cared for me, but deep down, I knew otherwise. University life brought new challenges. Despite my demanding schedule, I was still responsible for household chores. I woke early to prepare breakfast, stayed up late to clean, and managed the laundry in between. You can't neglect your responsibilities just because you're in school, my parents would remind me. Their words stung, but I carried on, telling myself it was temporary. As graduation approached, I decided enough was enough. Mom, Dad, after I graduate, I'm moving out, I said, steeling myself for their reaction. Predictably, they protested, their tears and pleas pulling at my resolve. We've done so much for you, they said. How can you leave us to manage alone? But this time, I didn't waver. Leaving wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For years, I had lived under the weight of expectations, sacrificing my own needs for the sake of the family. Now, as I packed my belongings, I felt a bittersweet sense of freedom. My parents' pleas echoed in my mind, but I knew I had to put myself first for the first time in my life. After graduating, I gave up on my plans for independence. It wasn't an easy decision, but the weight of my family's expectations bore heavily on me, shaping my destiny in ways I couldn't yet fathom. I began working as a sales agent, toiling from dawn to dusk, but life at home remained unchanged. Despite my long hours and growing responsibilities, I was still the primary caretaker, managing chores and fulfilling my family's needs without question. As I started earning, my family's expectations only grew. I recall my first payday vividly. My parents gathered the family for a meeting, enthusiastically discussing what to purchase with my earnings, as if my salary belonged to them. Their excitement was palpable, yet they never once sought my opinion. I felt like a mere observer in my own life, sidelined and unheard. Since childhood, I had carried the weight of responsibility heavier than most. Each paycheck became a recurring ritual where I handed over my earnings, initially for small requests I didn't mind fulfilling. But as the months turned into years, the requests grew, not just in size but also in tone. What started as polite suggestions morphed into outright demands. Despite my growing discomfort, I couldn't bring myself to speak up. A mixture of childhood trauma and an ingrained desire to be the good child kept me silent. Even my younger sister, Ellie, who was still in middle school at the time, seemed to have more influence over my finances than I did. She would voice her desires openly, and I would quietly comply, unwilling to disrupt the fragile balance of our household. At first, the amounts were small, manageable. But as their demands escalated, I found myself drowning. My salary as a packaging designer had reached $5,150 a month, yet after fulfilling their ever-growing expectations, I was left with just $500 for myself. Simple pleasures became impossible luxuries. Dining out with friends, getting a haircut, or even buying a small treat for myself felt like distant dreams. My life had devolved into an endless cycle of work and home, leaving no room for self-care or personal joy. At work, my unkempt appearance began to attract whispers. Colleagues speculated about financial troubles or secret misdeeds, rumors fueled by my inability to explain the truth of my situation. 3 years passed in this draining cycle. By the time I was 29, I had tried to negotiate with my family, asking them to ease the financial burden. Each attempt was met with stern resistance, particularly from my father. His intense reactions left me apologetic and feeling even more trapped. Despite increasing my efforts at work and earning a higher salary of $7,000 a month, the additional money only seemed to feed their demands. Once again, I was left with the same paltry $500 for myself. My parents, now retired, seemed to live comfortably, indulging in small pleasures and spending their part-time earnings freely. Meanwhile, I supported the bulk of the household expenses. This imbalance strained not just my finances, but also my emotional well-being. Every time I came home to see them enjoying pudding or other small treats, it felt like a mockery of my sacrifices. To outsiders, our lifestyle might have appeared ordinary, but to me, it was a reminder of how deeply I was entangled in their dependency. Even my sister, now 25, remained reliant on my income. Having neither pursued further education nor sought full-time employment after high school, she contributed little to the household. Her casual dependence only added to my frustration, but years of adapting to this dynamic had left me resigned to my role. One day, a pivotal moment arrived when my company introduced workplace counseling sessions to promote employee well-being. Reluctant participation from my colleagues often left me volunteered for thankless tasks, and this was no exception. During my session, the counselor asked about my family, and though I hadn't planned to share, the floodgates opened. I spoke about my living situation, my financial struggles, and the dynamics with my parents and sister. The counselor listened intently, their expression growing graver with every word. When I finished, they introduced me to the concept of financial domestic violence, DV. They explained how it encompasses not just economic control but also psychological manipulation. Their words hit me like a bolt of lightning, reshaping my understanding of my family dynamics. For the first time, I saw my situation for what it truly was, a cycle of control and exploitation disguised as familial duty. Not long after, my father and sister overheard a part of this conversation. Their concern quickly turned accusatory. "You're complaining because you don't feel thanked enough for giving us money," my sister sneered. You went to university because we supported you. Isn't contributing financially just a way of giving back? It's your responsibility as the eldest. Their words felt absurd and infuriating. While I understood the value of part-time work, their claims of contributing were hollow. They barely worked, leaving me to shoulder the burden of supporting everyone. Even so, they acted as though their entitlement to my earnings was unquestionable. My sister went further, challenging my ability to live independently. Her dismissive tone stung, but something inside me had shifted. Their arguments no longer held power over me. The counselor's words echoed in my mind, giving me the clarity and courage I had long lacked. I finally made my decision. Thank you, but I'm leaving, I said firmly. My family's initial reaction was disbelief, followed by panic. Wait, we were wrong. Please don't go, they pleaded, their tears and desperate apologies nearly breaking my resolve. But it was too late. I had already decided to reclaim my life. Moving out was both terrifying and liberating. The initial unease of living alone quickly gave way to a profound sense of freedom. I began to relish the small joys of independence, exploring new places, shopping for myself, and savoring moments of peace. However, this newfound tranquility was soon interrupted by a barrage of missed calls from my family. Out of curiosity, I returned one. My sister, nearly in tears, begged me to come back. Without my financial support, they were struggling. My departure had left a financial void they couldn't fill. My parents, with their long employment gaps, found it difficult to secure jobs. My sister, with no experience, faced similar challenges. For the first time, they were forced to confront the reality of their situation. Despite their pleas, I remained firm. Reflecting on my past, I realized how deeply I had allowed my family's needs to overshadow my own. Now, free from their control, I was finally able to focus on myself. For the first time, I looked forward to a future built on my own terms, with a clear mind and a full heart.